Good evening, everybody. Oh gosh, it seems too close. The time is 6:30, so we'll crack on. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Health and Environment Policy Committee in the Walton Suite at Winchester's Guildhall. My name's Jerry Pett. I'm a Winchester City Councillor and chair of this meeting. I welcome all of you both in the room, officers, members of the public, and all who've eschewed the test match in Wimbledon to join us on the City Council's YouTube channel. Please can everybody make sure that their mobile phones are at least on silent, if not preferably switched off altogether. Subtitles are also available on the YouTube channel for those who would wish, and you can see how to turn them on our website. In the unlikely event that we need to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by the learned team to my right. We have two members of the public who've asked to speak this evening. Firstly, Mr. Tate, who I think is content to go at the top of the meeting when we've done the other administrative points, and Mr. McMurtry, Andrew McMurtry, who wishes to speak on item 8. So we'll take those contributions in due course. Right. So first of all, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. There's no apologies for absence tonight. Everybody's present. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any declarations of interest, please, from any members? Councillor Lee.
Just on precaution, I am a trustee at WINAC, but I don't think WINAC is majoring on nature, so I don't think there's any conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. And in the absence of anybody else, I have to give my own declaration of interest that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of certainly item 8 on this, as I am a member of the South Downs National Park Authority, but there's no material conflict of interest since I have a dispensation granted by the monitoring officer that enables me to speak and vote on such matters. So that is that. The next item we have to consider is the appointment of a vice chair for this municipal year. Do I have any nominations for the vice chair? Please, Councillor Westwood.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Brophy.
Thank you very much. Do we have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Brophy, do you wish to stand? Do we have all those in favour, please, for Councillor Brophy? Any abstentions? Any votes against? I think that's your cue to join me up at the table. Next item is chairperson's announcements. I think the only announcement I have is that when we've considered the main part of business this evening, I would like a brief discussion on the possibility of setting up a task and finish group into any particular areas of interest we might have, but we'll come to that later on. Other than that, the dates and times of future meetings of this committee this year are on the agenda. 18th September, 2nd December and 25th of February next year. Next item is the minutes of the last meeting, which you all have in your packs on pages 5 to 12. Clearly, I was not present for that meeting, but if anybody else has any comments on those minutes. So can we take those minutes as agreed, please? Thank you very much indeed. Bear with me for one moment while my ancient computer scrolls through. So I think the next item is public speaking. Mr. Tate, if you'd like to address us at this point, please. I think if I may say, you're an old enough hand to know what the drill is, so please carry on when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak at this committee. I have reread the terms of reference for this committee, and they state to maintain a strategic overview of the progress towards the achievement of the relevant priorities in the Council's plan to include 1. Greener, faster, working with and enabling businesses, organisations and residents to reduce carbon emissions and achieve the Council's net zero carbon commitment for the district by 2030. I addressed this committee back on the 19th of September 2024, questioning the relevance of the Council's EV charging strategy in light of the fact that it had been quoted as part of the reason to refuse the Three Made Super EV charging hub. In response to the points I raised, the then chairman suggested that it may be beneficial for these issues to be raised at a future meeting of the Licensing and Regulation Committee. The Licensing and Regulation Committee deals with Council's licensing functions and not policy. I didn't have a right to reply at the time, so I couldn't challenge the suggestion of the chair. In crude terms, there are now 2 fully electric taxis registered through the Winchester Licensing Department. As I have previously explained, the very nature of a taxi is that it covers many more miles than the average private motor vehicle. So the impact on the environment of a taxi switching to all electric is disproportionately greater than the standard private car. What's the point of the Council's priorities if there isn't tangible support for businesses to go greener? The Council's now out-of-date EV charging strategy was intended to map out how the Council could support taxi drivers. They had specific mention many times, switching to all electric vehicles, and sadly the strategy has failed. I do quite a bit of advocacy work for taxi drivers. I speak to many taxi drivers. They are self-employed. It is a huge leap of faith for a taxi driver to take on the £60,000 commitment to take on a green taxi, and they cannot contemplate that. When I don't walk and use public transport, I want to drive green, and that's a taxi, and I cannot do that at the moment, or very difficult to do that. If this committee believes in the terms of reference, why can't it do something meaningful to support the city's excellent hard-working taxi drivers go greener faster? The super hub is not a solution. Speak to any taxi drivers, as I do. It does not help them a bit. They need a super charging point, as the strategy made very clear, in central Winchester, in the Broadway, possibly in the Guildhall Yard. I want to breathe cleaner and go greener, and that can be achieved by the Council supporting our excellent taxi drivers go electric. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Just hang on just a second. Does anybody wish to ask Mr. Tate any point of clarification on what he's just said? Okay, thank you. Perhaps I could ask, sorry? I'm sure you will be. Can I ask Councillor Lurney, the Cabinet member responsible, to make some observations on what we've just heard?
Thank you, Chairman. The EV charging strategy, as Councillor Tate has said, sorry, Mr. Tate, it's over 10 years of working with you, Ian, it comes naturally. Mr. Tate is quite right that the EV charging strategy is out of date, and it is something that we're looking at. The County Council has government funding to expand EV charging, and we are awaiting what their plans are going to be and to see where that funding might be directed before we can make any real commitments. The issue of taxis is a very difficult one, because clearly, unlike most drivers, they can't necessarily wait for the taxi to charge up for an hour while they have their lunch, and then that's enough until that's plenty of charge until well into the next day, even if they're driving cross country. However, the installation of super rapid chargers is not only very expensive, but the infrastructure needed is quite significant. We have looked at places where we might put one in town, Station Approach being one, but that even there it relied on an upgrading of the electrical infrastructure, which would require a lot of investment and would be premature in the light of potentially plans to redevelop that area. It is something that we will keep looking at. Obviously, we had clear ambitions to really push our taxi drivers and encourage our taxi drivers to switch to electric and move to an electric taxi fleet. But the infrastructure isn't there yet, but it will be quite difficult for us to provide that. For anybody who's been up to the InstaVolt charging hub, it is incredibly impressive, but they also needed to pay not only for a very substantial electricity cable into the site, but they've also invested very heavily into solar panels and battery storage. And it's very difficult for us to use those kind of measures in the heart of an historic city.
Okay, thank you for that. Do I understand from what you've just said then that we're in part waiting for further decisions from Hampshire?
In part, but given how slow Hampshire decision making is at the moment, then we might have to move ahead without it.
So do we anticipate something coming to this committee within this municipal year? Or?
I would have to consult with officers on that one, Chairman.
Okay. If we could formally ask that question and see what answer we get. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. As we're talking EV strategy, I'd like to put in a plea. As I understand it, the levy funding in Hampshire is focused on priority routes only. So I'm thinking about rural areas, wards, which are obviously often overlooked. And my understanding is that the strategy update will be focusing on the car parking in the city area, and the rural areas may not be a priority consideration. So can I just put on a marker to ask whether that can be a consideration, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for making that point, Councillor Lee. Yeah, if you live in Winchester town itself, then you do have quite a good network of chargers that you can reach relatively easily, including InstaVolt, obviously. But it's a very different issue if you're in the rural areas. And we tend to think that people who live in rural areas are all living in big houses with big drives, but actually many of them are parking on even narrower streets than we have in the city.
Councillor Lerney, this is something I've mentioned in the past, but I think while we're talking about an EV strategy coming forward, I mean, one of the concerns I've had and raised in the past within our own group is I suppose, the virtual monopoly of one particular provider, which I think has come about very much for very good reasons, as in they were a good pragmatic choice at the time we developed that strategy initially. Were there to be any policies brought or papers brought before this committee, it'd be quite good to understand how we can diversify the suppliers of EV charging on our sites, particularly with regards to pricing levels as well, because I think I've commented before, you do pay motorway level costs for charging an EV, and you also pay for parking for a charging experience, which is actually about 3 or 4 times slower than you would get at a motorway service station. So I think some of this is inevitable based on when you come up with a strategy. If you're an early mover, you end up with an outdated contract or an outdated technologies, and I think that's very much where we are. So I think we've got a great provision, as you say, across our car parks, but it's, you know, it'd be very interesting to find out how we're going to move that on to the next generation and get ourselves from where we are to where we might need to be.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Brophy. Yes, I did actually, when InstaVolt opened, I did ask officers to contact our supplier and point out how much cheaper it was in the evenings for super rapid charging than, as you say, in our own car parks. I can recommend the Hairstock car park, which has chargers which are being underutilised at the moment, but is a free car park and also has a very good bakery next to it.
Thank you, Councillor Lenny. Any more points anybody wishes to raise on this one? Okay, thank you. In which case, we will move on to agenda item 8, the Nature Improvement Plan. And we have Mr. Andrew McMurtry who wishes to address the committee on this particular subject. So, Andrew, please.
Good evening, and thank you very much for receiving my question, which I gave advance notice of. I'm encouraged by the Nature Improvement Plan and the proposal on page 16 of the agenda to create new habitat spaces for nature. As a step in this direction, could I ask the council to cut grass and hedges less often and less comprehensively? I do recognise that grass and hedges immediately adjacent to pathways and play areas need to be kept under control, but they are often cut back by contractors further than they need to be, thus depriving animals and insects of habitat and food. Could the council please make this commitment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's quite a specific point. I think before we move on to the paper in the round, can I ask Councillor Lerney, do you want to make any specific comment on that?
Yes, clearly we have a number of conflicting priorities when it comes to managing the hedges, which we do both on our own behalf and on Hampshire County councils in many areas. We do have requirements of our contractors. We have been discussing how we make those requirements clearer and also how we look at smaller cuts more regularly, rather than, as has been said, leaving it for too long and then having to effectively coppice your hedges. So there's not very much left, although I have to say they do grow back in remarkably rapidly. But as has been said, that does affect the habitat in the meanwhile. I would say, though, that it is healthy for hedges to, on occasion, be cut back quite hard. It's part of the normal process of managing hedges in the countryside, but it's not something that we necessarily do in a planned way in urban areas. I don't know if Rick Smith wants to comment on that.
Thanks, Councillor Lerney. Yeah, just backing up what you're saying, really, it is something that's on our agenda at the moment, and we're working with other teams within the council, the contract management. So we have our contract with Heidi Verdi. So we are reviewing elements of that, including hedgerow cutting, and how we can, yeah, like Councillor Lerney says, be most efficient with that contract, because we are restricted in some ways, and we have quite a variety of hedgerows, you know, in the city, in the district, that have different sort of needs. So the real specific 1 cut, 2 cut is quite difficult to then apply it in practice. So we are reviewing that and going through those areas and trying to have a little bit more flexibility so that we can allow the biodiversity benefits, you know, to come in on these hedgerows, leave them longer, not cut them back as severely. But we're just sort of balancing that with the operational measures. But yeah, that is something we're picking up with the contract management team.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, we have, okay, 2 comments. Councillor Miller first.
The problem is you do more cuts, it's fine, in the sense that you'll have less cutback, but you'll also be environmentally damaging because you'll have tractors and equipment going out there burning more carbon. So you're going to go around in a circle. You're not careful. You'll achieve one aim and cancel another one. And the trouble is, hedges grow very fast. You don't cut them enough, they become a real nuisance. You're going to have lots of complaints from the residents about their child getting scratched by the brambles or whatever is. So I think you've got to be very careful how you change your policy and which ones you change. Maybe some hedges you can do it with, but I think you've got to be very careful on a lot of them.
No, I absolutely agree, Councillor Miller. Earlier on, we referred to the EV charging strategy. Well, one of the things that we will need to look at going forward is how we convert our contractors to using electrical equipment as well.
I think what I'd like to do is just take comments on what we've just heard now and then ask you to bear in mind the contribution from Mr McMurtry as we go through and discuss the paper in the round. So, Councillor Latham.
Thank you, Chair. This conversation has cropped up before with, you know, in May I get complaints from residents both for cutting the veggies and, you know, the fact that both for and against. And we have discussed this before, and I appreciate we have a contract in place. Can I just ask, when is the ID Verde contract due for renewal, or, you know, the contract due for renewal? And maybe if we have enough lead time, we can sort of build some of this into the contract definition for the new provider, or, you know, whoever wins the contract, to factor in some elements, some defined elements of cut and collect for to encourage wildflower, certain areas to be managed differently, this sort of thing. So yeah, when is the contract due, and can we get a sort of enough time to get a plan together?
The contract is coming up for renewal, so we have been working on that for a while. However, it is being severely complicated by local government reorganisation, which makes it quite difficult for us to commit at the moment to a very long-term contract. As has been said, we're looking at having much more flexibility within that contract than we currently have, which will have swings and roundabouts in terms of the costs, because it will enable us to reduce costs in some areas, but will undoubtedly increase it in others. The issue with cut and take away is that is the taking away bit, and that does, as Councillor Miller pointed out earlier, that does actually dramatically increase potentially the carbon footprint of your operations if you're not careful. And we also have issues with where we can take any arisings from that. We are continuing our wild verge project, but we have found that within the limitations of what we know has worked from that pilot, it's quite difficult to find places where we can expand it in the rest of the district. I see Councillor Power nodding at me. She's had a lot of experience with the pilot in Alresford.
Councillor Powers, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. I seem to remember that under TC25 we were going to reduce our mowing regime from the 4-week schedule to the 6-week schedule, which is actually what the county pays us to do. Is that still the intent?
It's a consideration. The 6 weeks actually becomes quite difficult if you're looking at the biodiversity of some of your verges, because actually the 4 weeks schedule works really well for a lot of different flowers, you know, your dandelions, daisies and so on, whereas if you leave the grass to get too long, then you end up with a big load of thatch on top of it, because of the difficulties in taking it away, which can actually be very damaging. I don't know if Mr Smith wants to comment on that.
Yes, thank you again. Yeah, I think the again, flexibility is and that sort of compromise. Hampshire have been, it's hard to get that flexibility on sort of these, you know, due to sort of road safety is obviously going to be one of the main considerations for visibility and so on. It is something that our officers, so Zoe and Cora, have been working on quite a lot, you know, to try and optimise these. But the logistics, when you've got fragments of road verge, trying to organise all of these into having different, one side of the road is one cutting regime, the other side is different, really logistically for the guy on the ground on the mower is really quite difficult. So we have to get that balance again of the practicalities. Unfortunately, there will be times when we are going to cut a little bit more frequently than we probably would like, but overall we've got to the point now where we think we've got a good balance. We are leaving them to flower, you know, to offer those biodiversity benefits where possible. And I think that's we've sort of part of the nature improvement plan is reporting back on that, you know, showing actually, is this working? Is this providing improvements? And I just one more point I'll just add as well on the cut and remove. I think another point that we've been bringing in and being considered, we found obviously, I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer in a way, but the larger areas are easy to cut and remove and they offer bigger benefits. So when we've got large meadows, we have big benefits, but also when certain sites we don't have to take the cuttings away, take the arisings to a different site, so we don't have the carbon issues with transport, we don't have the damage and so on. We can leave them on site, so that's sort of beneficial where we can do that. And Topfield, Kingsworthy is an example where we've sort of introduced that, and we sort of compost down the grass there. And you know, there probably are pros and cons with that as well. There's some things coming up, but it's beneficial in those terms.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I ask, when the contract's up for renewal and you're looking to improve how that's taken forward, will the question of pesticides and herbicides be included in that? Thinking about nature improvement, if you're treating an area close to some of these spots, obviously drift and so on happens, and most of it is not very good for the environment, period. So is that something that's going to be in the mix for contract renewal? Thank you.
Absolutely, the use of chemicals within our operations will be included in that. Clearly, there are occasions when chemicals are the only real way of dealing with some particularly pernicious weeds and so on, and also in particular areas. And we do have protocols to manage that. Again, I'll pass this over to Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thank you. Again, we'll probably cover some elements in the nature improvement plan. So we do have one of the pathways or principles, sorry, focusing on use of pesticides and use of chemicals. I think we're not in the position to be able to say we would never use any pesticides. As Councillor Lerney says, there's times where we do need to with invasive weeds, that sort of thing, where we do have to use them. But whenever we use them, I think it's really important to say it's really targeted use. It's spot treatment, labour intensive, a guy on the ground treating each individual weed rather than a huge tractor with a sprayer going out. So you know, we need to sort of manage the perception of our use is targeted and smaller scale, but at the same time we're reducing that where possible.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. McMurtry. Hopefully we'll think that your points have been addressed, and we'll continue to bear them in mind as we discuss the nature improvement plan through the meeting. So let's move on to the paper in front of us, and I'll ask Councillor Lerney as the Cabinet member responsible to introduce it, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The Nature Improvement Plan in front of you today is very much a draft document, and we are really keen to listen to the committee's comments, particularly in relation to the proposed 5 pathways, principles and measures. The current Biodiversity Action Plan was approved in 2021 and runs until 2026. It sets out the strategic direction for how Winchester City Council responds to the need to protect, enhance and restore biodiversity across the district, with a particular focus on the council's own operations. Since the BAP was approved, we've seen a significant number of changes in the landscape in which our natural environment team work. The 2021 Environment Act in particular strengthened the requirements on government and councils to protect and enhance biodiversity. We now have an environmental improvement plan for England, mandatory biodiversity net gain requirements, and a new national planning policy framework. The County Council have also recently consulted on their local nature recovery strategy. This council has declared a nature emergency alongside the climate emergency, aligned the natural environment team with the sustainability team, and agreed a carbon neutrality action plan with nature-based solutions as one of its pathways. While work on the BAP has progressed well, we do need to move on and broaden our strategic approach, aligning with the National Environmental Improvement Plan and the Hampshire Nature Recovery Strategy, as well as our own council strategy. The Nature Improvement Plan 2025 to 2030 will outline the approach of the council across the wider district and moving from an activity-based model to one with aims and objectives, responding to the challenges of the climate and nature emergencies through how habitats are managed and species supported, and setting targets for taking action to restore nature and reduce pollution. I'm going to invite my colleagues Rick Smith and Zoe Goldsmith to introduce the actual draft nature improvement plan to you, and I look forward to hearing your response.
Thank you. Just before you come in, can I just check with members around the table that everybody's aware that there was an update to the draft that originally went out, so we're all singing from the same song sheet, as it were.
Chairman, could I just check that we will be looking at the original document on which I have made notes rather than the new document on which I have not made notes?
I understand, and perhaps you can update us on this. As I understand it, the only substantive changes in the update are to some of the to bring greater clarity to some of the diagrams. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It was just table 2. The formatting had gone a bit awry on the first version, so it's just that table that's been updated.
Okay, so I think your questions remain valid, Councillor Power. So yes, please, Zoe, do you want to?
Thank you,
crack on?
Chair. Yeah, so the draft Nature Improvement Plan 2025 to 2030 has been developed to set out the council's strategic approach to nature improvement, both on council-owned land and across the entire district. As Councillor Lerney's explained, this has built on our existing biodiversity action plan, and it looks to supersede that following feedback from HEP in December and aligning with the changes to national and local drivers. The aim of the Nature Improvement Plan is to promote and achieve nature improvement and recovery across the entire Winchester district. In order to help focus our efforts and set parameters of how we achieve this aim, we've come up with 5 key pathways for delivering this. So firstly, to protect and manage land for nature. Secondly, to create new spaces for nature. Thirdly, deliver nature-based solutions for tackling climate change, so directly aligning with our carbon neutrality action plan on that one. Fourthly, to prevent and control pollution. And finally, really importantly, to connect people to nature. For each of these key pathways, we've then developed numerical measures where possible, and that's sort of set for the 5-year period of the plan. So one set for council-owned land and then one set for the wider district. And it's important to note that those council measures will directly contribute to those district ones. And that will help us determine whether nature improvement is being delivered at the district scale. We'll also look to produce action plans each year in order to track our progress for those 5-year measures. As well as measures, we've also come up with some key principles in the document, and that's to provide clarity on the council's position and standards of working, particularly where numerical targets aren't applicable. So we've just heard about things such as use of chemicals, working with contractors, things like that. So it's not always possible to set numerical targets, but we felt they're a key part of this plan and what the council intends to do for nature improvement. So just ask the policy committee today to note and comment on the draft nature improvement plan, in particular relation to the pathways, the measures and the principles. And just finally, just to add that it is obviously a draft document, so we do plan to finalise the presentation before going to Cabinet in September, or certainly before publishing. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I open up with a few questions of my own? First of all, as I understand it, the government's target is 30% of land actively managed for nature by 2030, 30% of all land. Now, as you just said, 2 sets of targets here. one for council-owned land and then a broader piece. But and please tell me if I've got this wrong, from reading the draft, you're measuring land under active management for nature as, well, you're using SSSIs and sinks as a proxy for that. I wonder whether there's not an awful lot more land out there being actively managed for nature, such as, off the top of my head, Whitewall Farm Wetland Scheme, the Warnford Park Nutrient Mitigation Scheme. These are two quite large schemes within the district, and as Councillor Power pointed out to me the other day, there's another one north of Alsford, I think, as well. So are those schemes not to be included in that overall target? I'll give you that the first one and then come back for the next one.
Thank you. Yeah, that's absolutely right. The one of the targets set in the Environment Improvement Plan is to protect 30% of land by 2030, and we have considered that in our plan. And there is a slight difference in terms of what we've done for our council measures and the district measures. So for the council, we've got a measure in there to sustain 27.6% of Winchester land managed for nature. So that is based on what data we have available for our land. So it includes our biodiversity sites, which may not be sinks or SSSIs. It includes public open space and parks, but it doesn't include things like sports pitches or allotments. So we have used the data available for the council land to get a better picture of that broader kind of land use in terms of what we manage for nature. And that's quite close to that 30% mark. You're quite right, for the district wider kind of measures, we have used SSSIs and sinks as a proxy for that, and that's just based on the data available to us, I suppose. We want to be able to report back on this plan with confidence and to be able to compare, year on year, those differences. So it's something we could consider, but it's quite hard sometimes to compare a variety of sites and what their condition is. Are they achieving favourable condition as we sort of used for SSSIs, or favourable management for sinks? So yeah, it is a much lower target, but I think we've made it clear that that's what we're focusing on for the plan.
Okay, thank you. I mean, call me an old cynic, but yes, you're right, 27.6 is quite close to 30, but I don't have a direct understanding from reading the draft of how that relates to 30% of all land in the district and how close we might be to that, because I think we might be somewhere in the ballpark, but where's the evidence? Second point, and then I'll let members come in. The Hampshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy is referenced in here. What I don't see referenced is the National Parks own partnership management plan, which is currently under review, and how this plan beds in with and sort of rubs up against theirs, because we should be hopefully working constructively together rather than jarring up against each other, because that would make no sense whatsoever. How active is the interface between Winchester and the park on that?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. We do want to align with what the national park is setting out to do. Obviously, there are key differences. Probably I think it's around 40% of our district is covered by the national park, but not the entirety. So we do just need to be mindful of that. In terms of our approach to rivers, we are already members of the catchment partnership groups, and that's very similar in terms of the way that South Downs National Park is involving itself in terms of river work. Yeah, I don't know if Rick, if you'd like to add anything further on that one.
Thank you, Chair. No, not hugely, to be honest. I think, yeah, just acknowledging that we do have quite different habitats and different environments from the park. Excuse me, but we do totally take on board that we want to align. We want to work with them as much as possible. Yeah, I think as Zoe said, there are some differences in the area in that 40% coverage, but nothing else.
And I suppose that's what I'm getting at. 40% of the district is 40% of the district. It can't be that different because it is, it is part of the district. And I think perhaps the park has better data on that, on what is being actively managed for nature in their area than we do, perhaps. But we'll let that hang there for the moment and let me bring others in. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. You asked my questions actually, but I'll follow up on some of them if I may. I want to see clarification. So when we talk about 27%, is that 27% of the Winchester district minus the overlapping South Downs National Park area? Or is it the total Winchester district area?
Yeah, that's the total district area, so including South Downs and non-South Downs National Park area.
Okay, thank you. And I was going to ask, Chair, are we going to go to the appendices separate one by one, or so I don't need to get into the detail of that yet?
Yeah, I think we'll have sort of general questions to start with, and then we'll.
Okay, well, my
general, section by section.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. So I've just, as a quick look analysis, I look at pathway 1, it's sustaining. I'm looking at pathway 2, there's some creation and increase. Pathway 3, not sure. I guess it's increasing, arguably. And then obviously 4 itself is prevention and control pollution. So that's probably sustaining. And then the connecting with people might be a bit of increasing. And then when I start looking at the delivery opportunities, I'm not actually seeing very much. So what's the baseline in terms of where we are now? What is that baseline? What's the ambition for 2030? And what's the increment each year as we go through the action plans, if you see what I mean? And I'm not sure I follow that pathway through in terms of numbers, but that might come out when we go through the appendices. And my other comment is that we talk about the biodiversity units and so on. This makes a presumption that everyone understands what that actually means in the biodiversity net gain. My understanding is you can look at that in terms of habitat calculations. There's a best case and a worst case. So we can understand that 500 biodiversity units might mean an increase of 50 hectares, best case, worst case, 10. And I think, this is a document not just for council officers, it's for a wider audience. I think we might want to try and explain that simply, because it's quite difficult to follow that through. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Yeah, so just to try and cover your first question then, I think you're right, the pathways cover a combination of sustaining and improving, so protecting and enhancing. And then the measures go into the detail of the 5-year, targets, if you will, or measures that we're setting ourselves. A number of those are to sustain, and that's based on the baseline and what the council can do in terms of its input to change those, particularly for those things that are, triple SIs are of national importance and measured at that scale. We have got the section 3, which goes into more detail in terms of our baseline and what we've used to determine those measures. So hopefully that sets out a bit of a picture of what is the current, what we're currently dealing with across the district. And then the measures look to set our target for the 5-year that we'll measure, I suppose, and that we'll report back on. We haven't broken it down into years, but we've got in Appendix C, obviously, our actions for 25-26, which gives you an idea of how you could split them across the year. And particularly for the action plan at Appendix C, it states how those would be delivered. So some are obviously delivery by the council itself, and then we've got the ones that will be delivered through collaboration or enabling other partnerships and groups. So hopefully that gives some clarity on your first question. The second question, I do take your point that BNG is quite a technical thing, and not everyone has a full understanding of it. And you are right, the number of units depends on the type of habitat, the distinctiveness of that habitat, and indeed what condition it's in, so how it's managed and how that's changed over time. I think we have included a bit of explanation in the appendices, Appendix B, I believe, on BNG, but it's almost a topic you could do an entire paper on in a way. So we have kept it relatively brief, and the measure relating to that is something that we have a duty to report back on as part of the Environment Act, and that's why we've chosen to call it units rather than breaking it down into area, because it's quite unpredictable, and that's what we know that we'll kind of be reporting back on. Yeah, I think that's it on those. Thank you.
Just before I come on to Councillor Miller, could I make a suggestion then that, given I think there are going to be quite a few definitions that aren't widely understood in the broader populace, could we not have more pointers in here or active links that take people directly to the accepted chapter and verse on various definitions, various other data points that you've used? So
yeah, absolutely.
So just to make it easier for the general reader.
Yeah, of course. I think we recognise this as a draft, and there are lots of links to be added in, and so completely take that on board. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Miller.
I might have missed a point, but one of the things I thought we could try to do is see what farmers are getting grants for planting trees and hedges, because that's a way of showing how healthily we're doing across the district. I mean, in the last 5 years, I'm sure if the Cutler will confirm, there's been a lot of tree planted by farmers. I don't know if we're taking that into account in hedge plantings. You know, there must be somewhere available information of who's got grants to do what in that sense, and perhaps we should be looking at that sort of information to see how the whole district's doing, rather than someone measures like perhaps I've missed it, but I can't see we're taking outside information like that to be useful for us to measure.
Well, I think, and Zoe, perhaps you can help us on this. Apart from the schemes that I mentioned earlier, there are the farm clusters that have been set up both by the park and I think outside the park as well, where that sort of data that Councillor Miller is talking about should be relatively easy to come by and take in there, because yes, I'd agree there are an awful lot of schemes out there.
Yeah, thank you. If I can just add some clarity on that. I think you're quite right. There are loads of great initiatives out there, and farmers and landowners doing a lot to tackle the nature emergency. I think the difficulty is how, you know, is it right for the council to almost claim credit to some of those or to report back on that if we're not necessarily involved? I think what we try to do is make it clear what we're reporting back on is things that the council's kind of actively involved in. So we're either delivering ourselves or we're working directly with those groups to deliver those outcomes. So it's where you draw the line, isn't it? And whether that's something we want to be able to provide a bigger picture on, or if we want to focus on what the council's doing for the nature emergency. We have, yeah, we do, as part of this, we have got measures in there that's you know, relating to how many grants we give to nature conservation groups. So we will be capturing that information in terms of grants we're providing, and similarly for the work that our internal teams do with the farming clusters. So that again will be represented and reported back on as part of the plan.
I think this runs to quite a fundamental point here, doesn't it? It's not that we as a council should be taking credit for anything necessarily, but the responsibility of this council, as I see it, and I'd love to hear others' views in a moment, our responsibility is to understand what is going on in our patch in the broadest sense and collate the data on that so that we can report both to our constituents and, you know, back up the chain of central government as required. I'll leave that hanging and let Councillor Power come in.
Chairman, I don't think it's our job to collate that information. If the government is intent on making these mandates, which we're happy to celebrate, it is their job to actually report on where it's happening and make that information available in the public domain. We can signpost that data, but we should not take responsibility for collating that data because they need to do it themselves. But we do need that data because one of the important matters of biodiversity is to build on wildlife corridors. And if we don't know where these schemes are being set up, we can't complement them and join up with them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we're sort of dancing on a pin there, aren't we? That yes, we need the data to understand what is going on out there. Whether it's reported back up, you're absolutely right. It's not our role as such. Councillor Brophy.
Just wanted to I suppose, reorient myself on the overall objectives of this policy, and thinking back, I think it was to September when you came before this committee to talk about how this would be an evolution of the Biodiversity Action Plan. In some ways, I think a lot of the questions here are going to be about looking for the specifics and perhaps some of the tactics that make this tangible, whereas this is actually strategy. And I think, I suppose my memory is that part of the internal perception of where the Biodiversity Action Plan was falling short was that it was very much based on those specifics and those tactics rather than the kind of grander strategy. Would it be correct to characterize this document as actually trying to avoid getting too much into the weeds, pun fortunately there? Is this overall a kind of a guiding document? Should we not be looking for some of those specifics, because that's where we've actually, have we fallen down the rabbit hole of getting too specific too soon in the past? Is that what we're looking at here? Is the reaction to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. Although we wanted to obviously set those measurables that we can report back on, we didn't want to put every single thing that we're doing within our team for nature, and we didn't want to go into that granular kind of detail in terms of, you know, every single project. We wanted it to be a more kind of higher level overview. So just, you know, how much habitat are we creating across the 5 years? Yeah, and you're quite right. This is a strategy rather than that sort of document. So I think we have done what we set out to do in terms of building on the BAP in that way. So responding to those national and local changes and setting those high level targets for the council. And one of the key things with the strategy is all about reporting back. So you know, having that transparency, being able to tell the story in terms of what's happening in our district.
Could I just add quickly, Chair? Thank you. I think, yeah, totally agree with Zoe saying, and I think it's important that monitoring reporting was one of the key feedback we got from our previous HEP. So really keen driver, but also the elements of delivery of the nature improvement plan. You know, we're not just, as Zoe says, focusing on what we're doing, the action plan, that, you know, our operational sort of detail, but also it's that collaboration, the enabling things we're doing with, you know, trying to do with community groups, with, you know, the wider district and so on. I think that's, you know, again, that was something we obviously we have been listening to and trying to sort of focus on that as part of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Latham, Councillor Lee, and then perhaps move on to the detail of the
Thank you, Chair.
plan itself.
I quite often find myself in these meetings thinking about things from a district sort of perspective, and the collaboration with the city council outside the district. So it's welcome to hear you talk about that. On a sort of quite a specific note, I noticed that you've got community groups sort of listed out, and I would just point out that WINAC have a group called the We Can Network, which is a group of you know, green groups around the district. And again, if we're looking to both encourage and get feedback from, then you know, from around the district, then correspondence with those kind of groups. Well, it's an army of volunteers that can put these measures into practice, you know, on our behalf, on the district side of things, not the council land. And B, we will get that information back from them. We can ask, you know, how much space for nature has been created and things like that. So it's good that you're pointing to that, and I'd like to see it go further, and you know, you can cover a large swathe of the district with something like this We Can network. And then secondly, with the measures themselves, forgive me if I'm sort of not quite understanding it, but and again, I'm probably more focusing on the district measures. I understand with the council land, we're sort of limited with a finite stock and a sort of, you know, probably at maximum sort of usage, everything's already as it's going to be. But with the district measures, the targets I'm looking at are all sustain and not increase. Is there a reason for that? And even sort of within that question, how does that square with so sort of number 2 of the measures is to create spaces for nature, and some of the outcomes of that are the creation of natural spaces, but they don't seem to feed into then, you know, you'd expect that to increase canopy cover, or you'd expect it to increase the land designated for nature, or the number of sinks under positive use. And to go back, sorry, to sort of mix my 2 points together, I realise there is a process underway for discovering the ownership of sinks, but I know Bishop's Waltham Parish Council, for example, which I'm a member, we have a sink, and we don't get sort of particularly much help with what we could do with it and things like that. So I think reaching out to some of those owners of sinks could really bolster those numbers. So I guess my sort of second question is there, why are those numbers not going up? Why are they sort of capped at sustain? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a good question. I think probably it's worth noting that we sort of sustain as maybe the base level. So it's not to say that we wouldn't be looking to improve those, but that's our kind of minimum of what we want to do in the next 5 years, is to sustain. The other problem is that sort of triple SIs and sinks, you don't tend to get lots being designated year on year. Whereas we're only looking at a 5-year time period, I think it's quite unlikely to say that there would be even potentially a 1% increase in sinks, just as an example. So I think, although obviously we want to reflect that there is new spaces being created for nature, that won't necessarily sort of follow through into that those measures for that first pathway in terms of all those 4 that we've got to sustain. Yeah, so and then for the second pathway, we obviously have set some more measurable targets that are purely increases. So hopefully that reflects that improvement. I'm just trying to remember what your other questions were. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think really good question, and like Zoe was sort of highlighting with the sinks, they're massively important, but they're lower level sort of designations that on this hierarchy. So we have zero control over the sinks, which is an issue. We would like to be able to, well, we wouldn't be able to enforce, but we would like Natural England or someone to be able to do more. But we do have massive low control over that. But the land area that they cover is huge, because there's lots of them in private ownership, in huge, varying ownership, and I think also the understanding of the landowners of what that actually means is quite varied across that that spectrum, from really focused community groups, parishes and so on, who are focused on doing biodiversity improvements on that land, down to on the opposite scale of the spectrum, for whatever reason, maybe a farmer who that's not his main focus, is focusing on that as a sink for biodiversity. Not pigeonholing farmers, but it could be any landowner, but it's just a different focus. So being able to control that is really difficult. So I think that's probably why we're at that sustain, because some of them are in terrible condition and not managed, and really not, for various reasons, not in good condition, not being managed well. And then there's a few that are being managed really well. So to be able to say we'll bump that up, by 10% is really difficult to then achieve. So we need to make our our measures achievable as well, I think. And I was just quickly going to add, if I may, on we can, I think really valid, absolutely. And it's worth pointing out that our so under my management, there's 4 separate teams now. So we have sustainability, which is the carbon neutrality action plan, and we have ecology, trees and landscape and open spaces. So bringing the carbon programme together with all our natural environment teams is really important. And we have like I say, the sustainability team. We have the climate and nature open forum and things like this. So we are now trying to integrate those lots more, as Councillor Lerney will back me on. We're bringing in the biodiversity measures closer to the sustainability and carbon measures. So we want to meet with those people and get feedback on the nature specifics, as well as the sort of carbon delivery as well.
Do you want to come back quickly?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. One particular thing actually I did notice with the sink numbers, my screen's just gone off, sorry, but we're a little bit sort of hostage to fortune, I think, aren't we? Because there's so many unknown, and that was I thought an opportunity maybe rather than I mean, it does mean that if you discover sort of 20 more and they're all not being managed, then you lose your target, because the 61% of known sinks being managed for nature decreases. So there's a risk almost of finding out what's being done. But you know, there's a possibility, I think, to find out what more is out there, and then sort of collaborate with communities to have some, you know, again, not something that Winchester is necessarily driving, but just pushing the information out there, you know, to local groups. Do you know where your local sinks are, and can they be done? I realise that's a bit detailed, but and so then just to go back to the numbers then, so they are sort of deliberately kept at a sustained level, but we would sort of hope for them to go up. That's the way that basically what you're saying. Okay, right, thank you.
Councillor Lee, then Councillor Westwood, then we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. I mentioned this to the officers before, and Councillor Loney. I'm looking at page 18. I think it's the original document, para 2.27. It's the principles. It sets out guiding principles in relation to the way in which the council will deliver actions. But the particular point that is of concern to me is the need to reduce the risks reactive or contradictory approaches. And the issue here is ecosystem services, which some of you heard me talk about before. And I just wonder, and I know the officers may be thinking about it already, there's a principle 11 which might need to be ecosystem services. Remembering, of course, that the national park does look at ecosystem services, certainly in planning terms. And it's also important that we don't achieve negative outcomes, because the approaches that are happening in planning is not necessarily strictly habitat or species enhancement, but is ecosystems. On the other hand, you may want to have ecosystem enhancements, you know, urban cooling and all those sort of things. So I just wondered whether it's worthy of having a short conversation about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Lee. I know we did briefly discuss it beforehand, but yes, I think we take on board that there's potential that we could look at some of these principles and see if we can build in ecosystem services into one of those. I think we recognise that it can be quite a confusing term for lots of people. We've got principle 6, which we've titled multiple benefits, and I think in a way that was trying to recognise that, you know, we shouldn't be looking at nature alone or improvements to biodiversity as a separate entity. We should also be considering improvements to health and well-being, access to nature, you know, nature-based solutions, and then obviously there's those other services that you've mentioned, so pollination, flood alleviation, urban cooling, all of those things. So I think, yeah, we take that on board, and potentially we could look to include that or slightly amend the wording, because we do recognise the importance, and we want a strong link between our carbon neutrality action plan and that council priority of being greener, faster. It all links really nicely together.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood.
Thank you. And Councillor Lee brought up the subject of principles there. So we talked a lot about pathways and measures, but not about principles up until this point. So my questions on the principles are that there's a number there, and we have aspirations to deliver on these principles, but I don't see how they link back to the measures that we have in place. So if you're looking at chemical use, for example, how do you measure the use of chemical use? It's not actually in any of our measures, and I could pick pretty much any of the principles in there. I think there needs to be a stronger link to the principles in terms of how we measure and manage going forwards. Second is the wording in the principles is pretty woolly in places. We will endeavour. The council expects partners and contractors to consider biodiversity. Won't use chemicals unless considered absolutely necessary. I mean, there's a lot of weasel words in there, undefined, and you know, let the lawyers tell you what it actually means when you come to it. So I have some issues with the principles, is what I'm saying there. Going back to the other areas around the pathways and the measures, in terms of splitting into council and non-council, have you considered the HRA properties that we own? We own 1 in 10 homes in the Winchester district. and we own estates such as Stanmore and so on. I think there's a lot of council-owned land in that space. And I know it's a different budget, it's more difficult, but there's a lot of council-owned land in that space that we could consider bringing into this programme and actively managing. If I look at some of the measures, for example, then and the targets that we've got for 25-26. So if you're looking at like Swift boxes, you know, install 50 Swift boxes on council properties. Again, look back at that HRA, we refurbish something like 200, 250 council homes every year. And there's an opportunity for Swift boxes, whether it's relevant or not on all of them, I don't know, but for quite a number of properties. So I would say some of these targets are pretty low, actually, in terms of aspiration. I think they could potentially be higher in terms of what we can do on our own properties. When you're talking about the impact of climate change, we've talked in other committees and other papers and other meetings about building resilience into our activities. So, for example, not draining all the rainwater down into the drains and letting Hampshire worry about it, but moving that into green soakaway areas and so on. So I think that I don't find the word resilience at all in this paper. And I think resilience in the actions that we take is a really, really important principle that we need to incorporate going forward, because climate change is happening. It will change for the worse before it gets better. So resilience is really important. And my final point is talk about air quality at the beginning of the paper. Air is mentioned 3 times in the paper, but there's no actions around air quality whatsoever. And there's no link back to the air quality management plan within the document. I think that needs to be strengthened as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of those?
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, I think totally agree on air quality. I think that's a really good point. We do need to link in better with Dave's team and their strategy. We are involved with it, but I think we need to tie that in. That's a really good point. I think we probably focused in on our some of our closer colleagues. So I think we will look at that, definitely link that in with our overall ecosystem services and those sort of things as well. Yeah, agree again, resilience as well. Again, I think that's, it's the wording that we're using. We use it a lot in specifics within the tree strategy and so on. So again, I think it would work there. And again, that sort of work that links into your comments on the wording for the principles as well. I think here it's really linking back to the fact that these aren't measurable. So it can't be as specific. I think that's our issue here, is that we're trying to say that these are really important, but we can't actually count them. We can't actually measure them and come back on it. So that may be why the wording isn't quite as strong as it could be. I think one of the things that I would like to do, we might not have included it in here, we've discussed it, is maybe come back with some sort of case studies on certain principles. We would potentially do 1 or 2 we were looking at and come back and actually it's not measurable, but we can report on it and we can say this is a case where we've looked at biosecurity, this is a case where we've looked at partnership and so on. So I think we could at least feedback in that way and then see how that's going. HRA as well. Again, I think that, we have, so we might be able to tell you a bit more about the actual technicals on the data we've used. But I think, again, some of our measures with tree planting and so on does take into account HRA land as well. But I think we could do with a bit more clarity on how we've split that out, maybe.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Just to add to that, it does include measures that would be done on housing land. So I appreciate the possibly 250 Swift boxes for 5 years doesn't sound like a lot, but that is in relation to our contracts that we know are going ahead. So we do put a Swift box on every property that's re-roofed, and I've been involved in those projects for several years now, and we've put up hundreds already. So it probably reflects the fact that we're, that's something we're actively doing, and this is just for that 5-year plan period, as it were.
Okay, what I'd like to do now is move on to the draft paper itself and go through that section by section. I think before we go any further, I want to thank you both for the incredible amount of work that's clearly gone into this already. I mean, it's we're passing a lot of comments that you might infer are criticisms, but I think we would all probably agree that clearly there's been much really good work gone into this, and what we're doing is picking holes in some of that work. Fair enough, but that's what we're here to do. Constructively, absolutely, indeed. So if we move on into the paper itself, and we'll take the exec sum as read. Do we have any questions of substance in section 1, the introduction? I would just observe that in the list of partnerships and community groups at or is it 152, I think there are probably some holes in there we can help you with, because there are almost innumerable community groups under the radar that are doing equally good work, and some of the partnerships there we're missing as well, I think. Anything else on the section 1? Okay, so let's move on to section 2, biodiversity achievements 21 to 25. Do we have any questions of substance on the content there? Councillor Westwood.
Thank you. Yes, in section 2.2, you talk about completed actions, and you know, so there's a fine chart there. I was interested in what the outcomes were, which are not recorded in here. So you've taken an action, but what actually happened? What did we deliver? What good did we do through these? And I think that would strengthen that, just to demonstrate the outcomes, not just that we did something, but this was the result of what we did.
Yeah, thank you. I think we tried to give examples of some specific actions in section 2.21, but I appreciate there's, yeah, you're quite right with, as that sort of initial paragraph, we just sort of say actions have been completed. So perhaps we could add a bit more detail and then go into more specifics further down.
Any more comments in section 2? Okay. Section 3, our district's biodiversity. Councillor Power.
Quite a few, Chairman. Just stop me when you like. First of all, on page 37, you refer to the ecological survey programmes and the annual reports. That would actually meet the need to show what we achieved, because presumably you are looking at abundance and diversity on those sites. And if we include the link to the improvement on those sites, that would meet Councillor Westwood's need to demonstrate what we've achieved. I've got quite a few problems with page 40 and the section around that. I think there are an awful lot more triple SIs than you have actually listed. I think there's more SACs than you've listed. And I looked at this by going to our own GIS map and asking it to show the woodlands, the SACs, the sinks, the triple SIs. Those numbers are way too low. Would you agree?
I wouldn't agree. I mean, we've based this on the GIS, so perhaps we're looking at slightly different layers or something there. But I'd be happy to go away if you've got a list of ones you think aren't included. We could have a look at that. We don't have a lot of internationally sort of designated SBAs or SACs in the district. It tends to be the kind of main River Itchen or our estuaries basically, so the River Hamble. But we do have a lot of triple SIs. I mean, we've got 17 that's listed there, but those are split into lots of different units. So it might be that maybe you're looking at triple SI units that feed into those wider triple SIs, but I'm happy to go away and have a look if you think we've missed anything.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like sort of data sources that we're confused over there, so that's work that can be done.
Thank you. You've also mentioned the state of some of these triple SIs. I think it is also worth recording that some of them have not been assessed for some time. And I think we're giving people a false sense of security with some of the ratings they've got. It may be more useful if we included links to where up-to-date information can be found, because, and also you mentioned to me, Zoe, a plan that the EA have, or was it Natural England, to assess all of those sites by 2030. I think a reference to that would be very worthwhile. What else have I got around there? Yes, I don't think we're celebrating the richness and diversity of our triple SIs properly. And we know that most of them are in ownership other than our own. But if we don't bring to people's attention that how much we have got in the way of those special sites, we don't provide your councillors with the opportunity to bring that to the attention of their parish councils or residents or owners of that land and say, can we make it better? Can we join up these sites? Can we work together to make the biodiversity a better place? And page 45, let's see. Yes, the maps. They are too tiny. I think on all of the maps in here, you need to include a link to the source of that map so that people can go and look at the link, and it needs to be in the caption for the map to say, you can go and look here. I think I'll stop there, Chairman, if I may.
Okay, thank you. I mean, is that a realistic thing to ask, that we can get active links on each of those sites on the maps?
Yeah, well, we could certainly provide the link to the triple SI data. That's not a problem at all. We'll have to have a think about how we could take on board your comment in terms of really showcasing the richness of those triple SIs. Yeah, I mentioned like the River Itchen alone has hundreds of units that it's split into. So how we quite reflect that, I'm not sure, but we can think about that, because we've tried to just provide a high level for the entire site. In terms of the maps, yeah, take on board. They are small. They're just a flavour for this committee, really, and we'll obviously tie up the presentation and make them a lot clearer for the final version. It depends on the map. Some of those the data that's fed into them is, you know, available to all, so we would be able to provide a link to that data, you know, if it's based on Natural England sort of open source data. Other ones is provided by Hampshire Biodiversity Information Centre, so we probably could just put that that's where we've sourced the data from, but we wouldn't be able to sort of provide direct links to every single piece of data. And just to cover your other points, Councillor Power, I think, yeah, completely take on board what you said in terms of making it clear that some of that data is quite old and Natural England is looking to update that. So that's a sort of recognised limitation, I suppose. And yeah, I think hopefully that's everything you mentioned.
Councillor Lee.
This may be premature, but obviously local nature recovery society has lots of maps as well. Are you coming to that, or is this the place to put the link? Because I'm already asking myself questions. How does this fit in with the local nature recovery strategy, which I've just had the pleasure of going through a 300-page consultation? Thank you.
Yeah, it does absolutely link in with the local nature recovery strategy. So we've tried to align with that as much as we can. This obviously focuses on Winchester rather than the whole of Hampshire. But yes, we hope that the local nature recovery will both inform some of our pathways and measures in terms of what we're creating where, and the species priorities as well. So we haven't tried to kind of redefine those within this document. And we've equally, you know, focused on what they've listed to inform our maps and our plans too.
Any more on this section? Councillor Power, do you want to go back to your list?
Beg pardon, Chairman, thank you. On page 48, you refer to rivers. Is there any chance of pointing out that our chalk streams are, as to quote, rare and precious, and they should be in a special category of higher protection?
Sorry, I think my page numbers are slightly different from you, but yeah, we have put a paragraph in there about chalk rivers and how they're rare and ecologically important, to try and, you know, clarify that unique biodiversity that we've got within those designated sites. And then we've got the map that kind of provides those, but I can double check that that's sort of clear.
Thank you. And then on page 51, are there any opportunities for wetland creation under the wastewater treatment plants as part of our nutrient mitigation? I don't know if we've got any potential sites for wetland creation. I can't think of any.
Councillor Power, which page are you referring to in the document page rather than the Modern Gov page? Because I think we're all looking at slightly different versions.
Can you give us a paragraph number? I think that's those haven't changed.
3.4.1.
Right.
And 3.4. Sorry, I have to go up a bit. 3.4 council land. If we do have any wetland creation opportunities, that would be useful for both carbon sequestration and the NIP.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Barrett. I think a lot of the it's outside of our sort of remit, but a lot of the nitrate neutrality work that our planning colleagues have had great achievements with, and that's linked into our treatment works. So with our drainage engineers and so on, and they've done a lot of work on site already to get to those points. So I don't know if many of our own land holdings, we've got much opportunity now. You know, we are sort of limited in that way, that creation. So I don't know of any wetland creation opportunities directly.
I think just building on that, if we made a point of saying we were looking for opportunities for wetland creation, that would go some way of helping in that. Councillor Westwood.
If I may just comment on that, as it was my portfolio area before. So the wastewater treatment works they're mainly packaged treatment works, and so in my view there is no opportunity for wetland creation when upgrading those particular plants. That it's a second process on the packaged plant that's bolted on to strip out the phosphates and nitrates at that point.
Do you want to come back on that at all, or no? Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 48, table 6, and I'm just wondering for consistency, because on page 23, nature conservation designation, you give a nice percentage of 11.39%. But if I add up the priority habitats, that's whatever it is, 16.9%. But for context, maybe it's mentioned, but I didn't see it. Winchester District is what, 66,000 hectares? And it's just trying to put these things in context and consistency of percentages and so on. So I'm getting a sense of what that actually means. So priority habitats is, I believe, 16.9% of the total of the district. For me, that's quite informative alongside the nature conservation designations at 11.39%. And there may be other tables which would benefit from that way of presenting facts and figures. Thank you.
Well, I can see an immediate difficulty, for example, with trying to quantify a sack. You know, the Itchen sack. What's the size in land terms of that? I don't know. And how could we better reflect the fact that, you know, we've got that
I make a
incredibly
suggestion?
valuable thing.
I wonder in the local plan, there are buffer zones, are there not? For SSI designated rivers or SAC rivers, and they differ, if I'm right, 10 meters versus something bigger. Maybe that's determines the area. I don't know. Thought.
There are a few different ways you could look at it. So yeah, there are SSI impact risk zones that you look at in planning terms, in terms of where air quality may impact a designated site, and then obviously closer it's sort of direct impacts. And then when we look at things like BNG, we're sort of looking at, you know, that immediate river corridor would be 10 meters either side of a river. I think just for pure simplicity, we focused on the designation itself, because there is no confusion around that when we're looking at mapping and percentages.
Okay. Any more comments on that section 3? Okay, let's move on to section 4, visions and goals, or vision singular and goals. Councillor Ruffy.
This might actually be more of a general observation on the overall document, but one of the I don't know if it's a concern, but what I wouldn't want this document to become is a club for people to pick up and whack the council on the head with every time. Well, even in the planning department, for example, so often people will bring up our various policies and quote them at chapter and verse. And I notice here actually in section 4.1, it says the plan encompasses and informs the council's approach on its own land, and it's actually quite specific where the edges of this lie, because obviously there's also quite clear duties laid out in this with things like BNG, and it seems to place quite heavy obligations on some of this habitat protection, but at the same time there are areas that we simply can't control, and things like the planning regime, the members of the planning committee, their hands are tied quite strongly by what they can consider and what they can't consider. So some of these policies here would potentially cause a lot of confusion to people who could look at this and say, well, you've said that that's what you're going to do and what you want to achieve. Is there a need to perhaps strengthen that, the kind of how the parameters of the document are expressed, to say this is what this is for and this is what it isn't for? I think that sentence jumped out at me because it said it encompasses, the approach on our own land, and I thought that was actually quite a helpful bit of clarification in the document. I don't know if that's a question or an observation, but
Yeah, I'm not sure I have too much to comment, to be honest. Yeah, I can see what you say. I think, yeah, we do need to be wary, and we need to observe those how we work across the council as a whole. And we don't want to trip ourselves up, I suppose. I do see what you're saying. Maybe we can. Well, I think we would have that in mind when we review that. I couldn't promise any specifics, but I think, yeah, we will. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just add my own 10 pence there. I know in both the Winchester local plan, which you do reference at Reg 19, that brought in reference to not only the Itchen SAC, but also the compensatory MEON SAC, which is excellent, and the South Downs local plan, which you don't reference, which is 40% of the whole, therefore needs to be referenced. I think that too is referencing those SACs in its Reg 19. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm looking at connecting people to nature in Table 8. How many of the farm clusters are we connected with? Because that would be a more efficient way of communicating, possibly, rather than with individual farmers.
Yeah, Yeah, we could put it differently. We could say farming clusters. I suppose it just then doesn't give any leeway for other groups like land managers that aren't farmers. So yeah, we could think about that, but I think we were trying to include groups that aren't necessarily in the farming clusters.
I mean, I think it's true to say that the larger farm clusters, in terms of their land control, the size of their land control, are very, very significant, which is probably why it's a good idea to reference them specifically. Any more on this section, on section 4? Okay, the appendices, well, Appendix A is the glossary, so hopefully not too much on that. Appendix B, anybody got anything there? And then into Appendix C and the action plans for 25-26. Councillor Lee.
I'm looking at council land pathway to 2.2 500 metres hedgerows planted for nature. I mean, that's the headline figure for the 5 years, isn't it? So what does that mean? Will we not break that down and try and be ambitious and set some targets for the 25-26 action plan? And then what is it, delivery? It seems to have a blank there. Is it collaborate or deliver? I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so the intention would be to split the 500 metres across the 5 years. The reason that's blank is because this is for our 25-26 action plan, and we don't have any plans to plant hedges ourselves on our council land this year. So we do intend to do the 500 metres over the 5 years, but it's just that it could be 200 metres next year or 300 metres the following year. And so that's just showing the measure, but showing that there's no specific actions for this year. I think it's probably worth noting we are obviously recording what we're already doing. Whilst this hasn't been approved yet, we're carrying on with our biodiversity action plan, and a lot of these things feed into our kind of work programme anyway. So we are already kind of actively counting, but obviously this plan, we're hoping to get it approved and published in September. So we didn't want to set things that we didn't think we would achieve, before the end of the financial year.
Okay, I've got a next observation, if I may. So I'm looking at pathway 3, and I think in the document it talks about the tree canopy cover, and you've explained the 6.08%, which is great. And then you say, well, of course it could be more because there's lots of individual trees. Absolutely. So I just wonder whether in an action for 25-26, should we not be exploring tree wardens, establishing those, trying to engage and encourage people to stand up and be counted for that in that respect? And then there's a mapping way forward, I would have thought, and there are tools to do that. So I'm just concerned that's missing, because I think it's an opportunity.
If I might respond to that, Chairman, I think it's worthwhile noting that we are talking about the 25-26 financial year where we already have budget and resources committed. So additional actions such as that may well need extra budget to be asked for next year, but it's unlikely that we'd be able to fund that out of existing resource.
Chair, may I suggest that maybe that's an aspiration that is in the document somewhere? Is that a laudable way to
think?
Highlight?
I think we'd all accept that there's going to be little additional finance put towards that this year, because as you rightly say, that budgets are set in year, for the current year. But I think what I'm sensing is we'd like greater granularity of how you see this progressing across the 5 years. And I think it probably is true to say that there are opportunities to get credit for what individuals are doing out there as well. As I say, it's not, we're not going out to get credit for this council. We're just trying to paint a true picture of what's going on out there. Councillor Layton.
Thank you, Chair. Just sort of follow on from that a bit. I can't really escape, and I touched on it earlier. I've got like this nagging feeling of not quite enough ambition coming through, and I realise it's hard if we've not been measuring this stuff before. It's hard to know what actions we can take and what outcomes. Well, we haven't been measuring the outcomes; we've been measuring the actions before. So maybe I don't know. I'd like if we could have, maybe stretch targets or the aspirational, next levels, things that some of these I do feel that we might be able to hit in a sort of maybe an easier way than we think, especially with increased sort of collaboration. And I just, I would like to see, even if they're not in our sort of phase 1 goals, like say some maybe some stretch targets and a touch more ambition. On some of the measures, maybe that's kind of just been bubbling for me the whole time we've been talking about it. But thank you.
Do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just briefly, I think I want to just repeat myself and sound negative on it. I think we definitely do want to be ambitious, but we also want it to be achievable. I think we don't want to commit to things where we're not delivering, and we are aware with local government reorganisation coming in that we have these periods that we are really trying to be ambitious but achievable, and I don't want to come across as negative. So we will review and look at real detail on that and see where we can push. If we can push specifics, like you say, with community groups or so on, then absolutely we'll try that. But sort of got to get that balance, I think. But yeah, we'll take that on board. Thank you.
Councillor Bruffy.
Can I unhelpfully contradict Councillor Latham and give you a contradictory perspective? I think last time you came to HEP, one of the concerns I had was that there may be a danger that by pushing yourselves to deliver on targets, stretch or otherwise, you end up creating perverse incentives to focus on the things that are measurable. And I think Zoe, we spoke about the Badger Farm flower beds and verges, where what will succeed, but it may take 10 years before you can even measure the bugs and beasties that emerge on that, even though you've created a habitat that science have told you will produce the outcome that you desire. If you set a 2-year target to try and measure the emergence of the creatures that will come, and they don't come, then you look like you failed at something that might take 5 years. So I guess the question is there a possibility to also explain within this document the limits of targets and why certain things shouldn't be measured, but certain things that perhaps are evidence to work should be pursued? Because I think they're not always the same thing, and I think there's a real danger that we throw more demands for specificity on you, and that's not what is always the nature of what you do.
Excuse me, Chairman, I'm ready to go. I will catch up with the remainder of the meeting on YouTube before we move towards finalising the document.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think really appreciate that. I think that is really key, and it's really good to sort of remind us of that as well. Actually, we do put that out there quite a lot, that land management as a whole, it's long term. 5 years is really short term for noticing and realising these benefits and improvements, as we're calling it, in a nature improvement plan. So it is, I think that's a really valid point. Let's put in some explanations and limitations of this, and try to highlight long-term goals and make that clear. Whilst at the same time, we do want to achieve the best we can. We want to be ambitious, but really put that in context. And I think we can sort of link that in, the comments earlier on, what we're championing, our real best bits of Winchester, and those habitats that we can sort of reference as well. So yeah, I think we can sort of dig into that a little bit, can't we, and try and put some emphasis on that.
Thank you. Councillor Westwood, then Councillor Lee.
Thank you. Just on connect people to nature, I probably should have raised this earlier, but I think there's a whole area we are missing in terms of people's gardens and connecting to the residents and the people directly. If you can engage people in the need to improve the environment for nature, and they can start at home, I think it's a really powerful thing that would carry through into everything else that we want to do. So personally, I'd like to see something in there that focuses on people, their gardens, their private land, somehow, just to encourage them to do the right thing in their own home.
Yeah, thank you. We can certainly look at that. I think we probably haven't gone into loads of detail of that. We've kept it higher level in terms of, yeah, what we can report and measure. And it is an important aspect. We do work with a lot of those community groups on things like that. So there's the Hampshire Meadow project going on at the moment where they're specifically working with people in their gardens. So I think there are things like that we're doing already. And I suppose, again, just because this is a sort of a strategy, we don't go into that real granular detail. We want to, you know, have flexibility to, you know, link in with campaigns and initiatives like that where they're going on, or projects where groups are delivering those things. But yeah, we can take that away and then see if there's anywhere we could, you know, build that in.
Just come back, I would think that is a strategy and it is a policy, so it is relevant in here. The detail of how you do it is not, but you know, the principle is we want to get people on board with this, and if we can get them on board in their own home, that really works. So I think it's a principle and a strategy. I think it's an important plank.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm trying to get my head around measure 3.2, an additional 50 tonnes of CO2 sequestered on council land. I've got a rough figure in my head which says something like a 10-year-old tree may deliver 48 tonnes of CO2. So we're either growing industrial hemp or something. How do you derive that figure? It does seem a lot in a very short time. It's a 2030 measure, and here we are nearly 2026.
Yeah, so that measures for the 5-year period. We've based it on, we got a baseline assessment done by Arcadian, so who are sort of the subsidiary of Hampshire Isle of Wildlife Trust, and they provided us with some excellent baseline figures on what our land currently sequestered, and also recommendations for how we could improve that. So measures such as introducing woodland management where we haven't got any already, so coppicing, things like that could have that potential uplift, and essentially we're hoping to do those recommendations that they've provided us with, which would meet that target. Probably whether we'll be able to measure that 50 tonnes over the 5 years, I'm not entirely sure. We could say that we've implemented those measures which will eventually result in that, but yeah, maybe that isn't completely clear, that it won't be 50 tonnes by the end of the 5 years. So that's something I could go away and check.
I think it's very optimistic.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I very much feel that we want this document to be something we can show to other people. I want it to be a living document, not something that we only look at once a year. I want to be able to say, this is what Winchester is doing. Can you do something similar? And I feel that by including the links to the data sets, we can do that. By including the links to other maps, I'm not sure whether it should be in the document or as an appendix, but we can enable those conversations to be had by all councillors with their parishes or whoever else they find. And I don't know, Chairman, what would be the best way, but I would like that to be looked at, please, because it's a really useful document. People are doing a lot. We want to be able to celebrate that, but I don't want to burden council officers with having to maintain that information. I want them to be able to signpost so that we can do the celebration. Does that make sense, Chairman?
Yeah, I think it does. Do you recognise what Councillor Power is saying there? Yeah, good. Okay. Any other comments on the detail of the draft plan? Okay, can I, excuse me, can I take us back to the paper itself that we've got before us? And the recommendations. Now, we've been asked to note and comment. Well, I think we have commented in quite some depth. I suppose the question for me now is how we move this forward. Because yes, we can probably sign up to those recommendations that are in the report, but that's not necessarily the most helpful way of doing this. I noticed our next meeting is on the 18th of September. And I don't think we need to do the same exercise as we've done this evening, but I think probably members of this committee would like to see this paper again before it goes to cabinet, if only just for reassurance that we've made progress in most of the areas that we've raised. Given that we're now early July, August is dead. 18th of September isn't that far away. Am I giving you a ridiculously ambitious target of giving us something we can at least take note of in September to give us reassurance that there's been a bit of a
Yeah,
move forward?
I think that should be absolutely fine. I suppose the question is, how long would you like to have to sort of digest that and read over that before it goes to cabinet?
I think we probably need to look at the detail of that unless we've got that to hand. Have we now? Yeah, I think we'll have to look at that. But I mean, ideally, I think if members of this committee could have it at least with the papers for the next meeting, with an instruction to review prior to the meeting and raise in session any particularly burning issues that arise from it, but on the basis that those are going to be the exception very much rather than the rule. Yeah. Okay.
Because we won't be able to, it might have to be virtual.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I would take that away and look at the timings for the various meetings, because I'm concerned that to have it tabled at the 18th of September meeting might conflict with the timetabling for the cabinet report. But I'm sure that we will be able to circulate it to the members to do it online, virtually, and provide feedback that way. But we'll need to look at the timings of those meetings to facilitate that in the best way.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's all we're after, really, isn't it? Getting some sort of warm feeling that our debate over the last hour or so has not been entirely in vain. Good. Thank you very much indeed for the paper. As I say, we all recognise, I think, that a heck of a lot of hard work has gone into that, and we are criticising it in the most constructive way we possibly can, because I think we've got a good story to tell, and we just want to make it even better than it is. So, on the formal recommendations in front of us, are we agreed that we have noted and commented on the draft NIP, in particular in relation to the 5 pathways, the principles and the measures? Thank you very much indeed. Bear with me while my steam-driven machine scrolls through to the next item. Yeah, here we go. The forward programme then. So we've had the NIP this evening. We have Campbell Williams Future of Waste project in September already, and David Ingram with the air quality strategy. So we will be quite busy in that meeting. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I note a light agenda on the 2nd of December. And if I could refer you to the minutes, it said that I would produce a scoping document for nutrient neutrality and how the council was handling the aspects of that. I did produce that scoping document, which I think you have seen. However, it was judged that there were not the resources to do that because it did involve several meetings, which would have included officers. I wonder if there is merit in us considering us forming our own working party amongst councillors to talk to people outside the council as well as inside the council with a view to sharing our findings with others. I would add that I am now also on the Push Scrutiny Committee and had a very interesting meeting yesterday and took the opportunity to talk to the project manager for Push, who reassured me that there were more than 2 ways to deliver nutrient neutrality in the Upper Itchen, which got me very excited. I merely suggest that as a possible item for the December meeting, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Yeah, I agree. December looks a little bit light. I think at the moment, I would ask, are we agreed with what is in that current work programme? And then we'll go on to discuss something that came up when I discussed with the 2 other chairs of the scrutiny committees as to how we take some other issues, nutrient neutrality being one of them, forward. So do we all agree to that work programme as set out in the document in front of you? Good, thank you for that. Moving on from that, we have, as the 3 chairs, have been offered by the Chief Exec the opportunity to each conduct one task and finish group. When we delved into what the Chief Executive meant by that, it appears that we'll get 90 minutes of officers' time in a meeting, virtual or real life, to go through one particular issue. I'm particularly attracted to the idea that Councillor Powers just put forward, that we as a committee could set up a small group to take forward work on nutrient neutrality. Was one idea when we were talking as 3 committee chairs. The other notion we looked at was the state of public loos. I'm minded to rule out the public loos piece simply on the basis that to be able to do anything constructive on that, we would need to negotiate access to documents that we might find we weren't permitted to see for reasons various. Did you want to come in on this?
Yeah. Let you finish on that.
Okay. So first point is, are we agreed that it might be a useful idea to set up our own committee from all party members of this committee to look at a particular issue? And go on, do you want to come in now and help us on the...
If I may, my understanding is that it's to do with the issue of nutrients, and that this has been referred to scrutiny committee, and that there is going to be, as I understand it, a members briefing this summer. So it's really for that place is where that conversation and that scrutiny will take place. So it's not for a task and finish for this group, as I understand it.
Okay, I think the issue was not nutrient neutrality as such. The issue that we are potentially looking at is how our constituents are incentivised or not to improve their own systems, whether off mains drainage, how the planning system, both in terms of the Winchester local plan and the South Downs local plan, treat those incentives, and how we can get a better common understanding across the piece of how we take that forward. Now, I don't think that's treading on the toes of an all-member briefing on nutrient neutrality, but do help me out.
I don't have enough detail to be able to give you that level of guidance. If this is an area of interest, I think we would have to take that away and just make sure that there is not any conflict with that other piece of work that's going on with any area of topic that you want to explore.
Okay, so on the point of principle, is it within our constitutional power to establish a subgroup of this committee across all parties to look at a specific issue of interest to those members and take that forward ourselves?
I'm I haven't got the terms of reference. I'm sorry, as I said, I need to just double check that. So.
Fair enough. In which case, going around the table this evening, if we were to check our constitutional position and it were possible for us to take forward some work on incentivising nutrient neutrality, upgrade schemes for domestic plants and that sort of thing, in general terms at this stage, would that be something we would be interested in as a committee?
Chair, I would just say that hopefully we're considering across the district. It's not just the Itchen. I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Councillor Power?
No, Chairman, I'm very happy. It should be across all of our rivers. And I've heard a rumour that the test may also be phosphate controlled in the future. I don't think we can hope for the MEON as well, but I think we need to increase the level of knowledge, certainly in this committee and amongst all members. I would ask though, this member briefing, I would ask Mrs. Robbins to ensure that it does not just include upgrades to council-owned properties, but also the barriers in the planning system at the moment to those upgrades, and also those upgrades that will be undertaken by push directly, possibly on some of our sites, because I think I want everybody to be able to hear what I have been told and give it their critical consideration. Thank you very much.
Councillor Lee.
I just wanted to highlight, you mentioned already, the Partnership Management Plan for South Downs National Park has an aim to improve the Water Framework Directive by 10%. And I think that plays well into that. And as part of the Nature Improvement Plan and what we're thinking about, I think it's wholly appropriate that we start thinking about what that actually means from our perspective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, if you're content, then I'm meeting with the other two chairs virtually, I think, in a few weeks' time. And I will take forward that suggestion if you're all agreed this evening. Adrian.
So just to clarify, is that we've got a finite amount of resource? Is this the only topic that we want to push forward as a group, or is there a question, are there other topics we'd be interested in considering, or are we being asked to approve that we use that limited resource just for this one topic?
Okay, as I understand it, Mrs. Robbins will correct me if I go wrong on this. We are being offered one 90-minute slot with senior officers on one topic. What I'm suggesting is we don't necessarily need to be constrained by that, because we can go off and have, as a group, have meetings with other bodies, Push, for example, or the Park Authority, or Portsmouth Water, or whoever. So the only constraint on us is the officer time we can directly draw upon here. And the Chief Exec wanted the three committees to come up with 3 topics on which they would use that 90-minute session. So if we've got something else that we want to use for that 90-minute session, so be it.
The reason I mention this, things like EV charging strategy is one of those hobby horses I bang the drum on a lot, particularly social inclusion and EV charging strategies. And it's a topic that if we don't force it, I think could get lost. But it sounds like a new policy is coming forward, so it might not be appropriate to raise that sooner, but it could be a good way of getting kind of cross-party views.
If I may, I think the EV strategy which is coming, Ms. Robbins might correct me if I'm wrong, is going to be wholly focused on the city and car parks. And picking up on Councillor Brophy's point, it's this wider aspect, which I think is something that we might be able to look at. And I was picking up on Gloucester's electric vehicle charging strategy, and they have a cluster approach, particularly for rural groupings, to make it workable and possible. So I think there are lots of blockers in trying to get the social inclusion and the rollout into rural, which perhaps we're not considering. This may be an opportunity as a subject. Thank you.
Good point. So, okay, well, I will throw that one into the mix as well, certainly in terms of how we use the offered officer time on that. And get back to you probably well before the next meeting. I'll email around what the outcome of that meeting of the scrutiny committee chairs is. Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. Thank you very much indeed for your attention this evening. Thank you to the officers, both for the report and for your patience with us this evening. And a very good evening to everybody.